Alright, I want to make an effort to try and understand what flow patterns look like and how we can describe them. So before I start talking about the mathematics of all this, I just want to talk about generally what flow patterns look like and why they look that way. Okay, so I'm going to distinguish between two basic types of flow patterns. One that I'll call laminar flow patterns and another kind that I'll call turbulent flow patterns. Laminar flow patterns are the ones that I've already been basically sketching throughout the course. So the idea is that, I've shown these pictures of, for example, when I have fluid between a flat plate and I apply a shear stress between them, I've shown flow, and I tried to sketch out that you can imagine that these things are basically individual layers where each layer moves past the other layer at basically a different speed. So that's called laminar flow, and it's called that because lamella means thin sheets in Latin. So essentially, laminar flow is any flow where one layer of fluid or layers of fluid remain distinct as they flow past one another. So like if I was to create like a dye pattern inside, I would actually be able to see sort of sheets or sort of smooth movements of layers past one another. That's not the only type of flow pattern, so it's important to distinguish it. But laminar flow patterns are always present at sufficiently low flow speeds. So at low velocities or low flow speeds, laminar flow is the rule, and this is basically the type of flow patterns that we'll see. There's lots of different examples of laminar flow, and these are really the flows that will be most successful in describing in a lot of mathematical detail in this class. So like here's an example of a flow pattern at low speed around a cylinder. So so in these are actually experimental images from like the 1940s where somebody had created a flow pattern and injected dye at various locations, and you can see that the dye patterns basically remain parallel to one another as they go throughout the flow. So that's a laminar flow. Here's another example of a low speed flow around a wall type barrier where flow sort of smoothly approaches, goes over top, and then basically goes down the backside smoothly as well. And then here's an example of a low speed flow over an airfoil. So this is a more streamlined type shape like what you would see on an airplane. So again, so we've got dye that comes in, travels sort of parallel to one another. The dye can sort of deflect upwards and downwards throughout the flow pattern, but basically you can distinguish the pattern of the flow by just looking at the different layers of dye in these cases. And of course, if you were to make a dye pattern inside of the bottom right example is one of a dye that's been introduced into a pipe. And if it's a laminar flow, basically the dye just moves along in a straight line and you basically see nothing. In this case, they haven't made an attempt to put multiple dye patterns in. I think the top and bottom there are actually probably the glass walls in this in that experiment.